My sister stole my identity to live a life she could not afford and left me $80,000 in debt. When I dragged her to court, my parents took the stand and testified against me to protect their golden child. But they forgot one thing. The judge had a passport that proved their entire story was a lie. Before I tell you how I sent my own family to prison, please like this video and subscribe if you have ever been punished for being the responsible one. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I finally thought I had escaped the chaos of my upbringing. Standing on the balcony of my penthouse in downtown Atlanta, I watched the city lights shimmer like diamonds. This silence was expensive. I had paid for it with years of 60-hour work weeks as a forensic accountant and strict boundaries with my family. I took a sip of vintage Cabernet and closed my eyes, letting the cool evening air wash over me. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. I felt secure. But peace in my family is always just the calm before a hurricane. My phone buzzed violently against the marble kitchen island, shattering the moment. The screen flashed, unknown caller. I usually send these straight to voicemail, but a knot of intuition tightened in my stomach. I slid my finger across the screen. The voice on the other end was not a friend. It was the cold, robotic tone of a debt collector from a collection agency. She asked to verify my date of birth and address. I let out a sharp, cynical laugh. I deal with financial fraud for a living. I catch people who cook books and hide assets. I told her to stop wasting my time with scams and went to hang up. Wait, she said, her voice dropping an octave. This is regarding your American Express Platinum account ending in 4092. You are 90 days past due. The outstanding balance is $80,450. I froze. The wine glass trembled in my hand. I told her that was impossible. I pay my balances in full every month. I have a perfect credit score. I do not have a card ending in those numbers. She did not back down. She read off the last 4 digits of my social security number. Then she read my old address, the one where my parents still lived. The room suddenly felt very small and very hot. My professional instincts kicked in, pushing down the panic. I asked her to tell me who the authorized user on the account was. There was a pause, the sound of typing on a keyboard, and then she said the name that turned my blood into ice. Ebony King, my baby sister. The one who had just posted photos of a luxury vacation in Cabo with her husband. The one who claimed my father paid for everything. I looked at the phone in my hand as if it were a poisonous snake. This was not just a mistake, this was a crime. And the criminal was coming to dinner on Sunday. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did what I have done every day for the past 10 years as a forensic accountant. I went to work. Walking into my home office, I woke up my workstation. The glow of 3 monitors illuminated the room, casting long shadows against the walls. I logged into the credit bureau portal, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I needed to see the damage with my own eyes. I needed the data. When the full report loaded, the breath left my lungs. It was not just one card, there were 3. An American Express Platinum, a Chase Sapphire Reserve, and a Saks Fifth Avenue store card. All opened in my name within the last 6 months. All maxed out. I scrolled through the transaction history, and it read like a diary of a millionaire, not the sister who claimed she was struggling to pay rent. There was a charge for $5,000 at Hermes in Buckhead on May 12th. I pulled up my phone and opened Instagram. I scrolled back to May 12th. There was Ebony posing with a brand new orange Birkin bag. Her caption read, "Blessed, Daddy spoils me best." My stomach churned, but I kept digging. June 15th, Ritz-Carlton, Cabo San Lucas. 7 nights in the presidential suite. $12,000. On Instagram, I found a carousel of photos from that week. Ebony and her husband Brad clinking champagne glasses by an infinity pool. She had tagged the location. Her caption was, "Anniversary trip of a lifetime. So grateful for our abundance." I looked at the credit card statement again. The abundance she was grateful for was my credit rating. She was living a champagne life on my budget, stealing my financial future to build a facade of wealth for her husband and her followers. I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my chest. This was not a mistake. This was calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew I had excellent credit because I had co-signed her student loans years ago. She had used my own generosity as a weapon against me. I printed every single page. The printer whirred in the silence of the apartment, spitting out sheet after sheet of evidence. I did not call my parents. I did not call Ebony. I grabbed a red marker and started circling every fraudulent charge connecting them to her social media posts. The ink bled into the paper like a wound. They wanted to play pretend. They wanted to act like the perfect wealthy family. Well, I was about to give them a reality check that no amount of filters could hide. I organized the stack of papers into a neat folder. Tomorrow was Sunday dinner at my parents' house, and I was going to bring a side dish they were not expecting. The truth. Sunday arrived with the heavy, humid heat typical of a Georgia afternoon. I pulled my car into the driveway of the house I grew up in, my stomach tightening into a knot. The air smelled of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce. It was a scent that used to mean family and safety, but today, it just smelled like deceit. I checked my designer tote bag one last time. The manila folder containing my credit report and the forensic analysis was right there, sitting next to my wallet. I took a deep breath, adjusted my blazer, and stepped out onto the pavement. My mother Viola was already waiting at the screen door. She hugged me, but her embrace felt stiff and obligatory. "You are late, Nia," she whispered, her eyes darting around. "Do not start any drama today. Brad is here and we are having a nice time." I walked through the kitchen and out to the backyard patio. My father Otis was standing by the grill flipping ribs with a pair of metal tongs. But the center of attention, as always, was Ebony. She was sitting on the wicker love seat next to her husband Brad. Brad is a nice guy, a personal trainer from the suburbs who thinks my family is like the Huxtables. He has absolutely no idea that we are actually closer to a crime drama. Ebony was holding up her iPad, scrolling through high-resolution pictures of the Cabo trip. "Look at this view," she squealed, zooming in on a picture of a sunset dinner. The water was so blue, it was literally paradise. Brad looked up and saw me standing by the sliding glass door. "Hey, Nia," he said, his smile wide and genuine. "You really should have come with us. It was incredible." He turned back to my father with a look of pure gratitude. "Otis, I really cannot thank you enough. That resort was top tier, the butler service, the private plunge pool. You really outdid yourself with this wedding gift. I know it was expensive, but we appreciate it so much." I froze. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at my father. Otis did not flinch. He did not look ashamed. Instead, he puffed out his chest, flipped a rib over, and nodded sagely. "You know I take care of my girls, Brad. Only the best for my Ebony. Nothing is too good for family." My blood ran cold. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a sickening snap. It all made sense now. Ebony had not just stolen my identity to buy things. She had built an entire fantasy world where our parents were wealthy benefactors. She told Brad that Dad paid for the trip. She told him Dad bought the designer bags. In reality, Dad is a retired mechanic living on a modest pension, and Ebony has not held a job in 2 years. They were using my credit, my hard work, and my name to fund a masquerade for her husband. They were letting him believe they were rich, while I was the one footing the bill and silently ruining my financial reputation. I gripped the handle of my purse until my knuckles turned white. The audacity was breathtaking. They were literally eating food paid for by my stolen identity, praising my father for a generosity that was actually grand larceny. I walked over to the table and pulled out the empty chair opposite them. My father smiled at me, daring me to ruin the mood. I placed my bag on the table with a heavy thud. The sound of the heavy file hitting the wooden picnic table echoed like a gunshot. The chatter died instantly. Even the cicadas seemed to stop buzzing. I did not look at my parents. I kept my eyes locked on Ebony, who was mid-sip of her iced tea. I reached out and flipped the folder open, revealing the page with the most damning red circles. "So, tell me, Ebony," I said, my voice steady and cold, "was the presidential suite worth it? I see here it cost $12,000 for the week. I certainly hope the thread count on the sheets was high enough for your delicate skin." Ebony choked on her drink. She set the glass down so hard it splashed onto the tablecloth. Her eyes darted frantically to Brad and then back to me. Her face went pale beneath her makeup. She let out a high-pitched nervous laugh that sounded more like a shriek. "What are you talking about, Nia? You are being weird. Put that away. We are eating." I did not move. I pointed to the statement. "And that Hermes bag sitting by your feet. $5,000. Charged on May 12th. The same day you posted a photo of it captioned, 'Daddy loves me.'" I leaned across the table, invading her personal space. "I hope you enjoyed living like a queen little sister, because you just maxed out the credit limit on a card I never opened. You have spent $80,000 of my money to impress a husband who thinks our father is a millionaire." I felt a sharp pain explode in my shin. Ebony kicked me hard under the table, her heel digging into my bone. She was glaring at me, her teeth clenched in a rictus of a smile, her eyes begging me to shut up. "Not now, Nia," she hissed through her teeth. "We can talk about this later. Stop being dramatic." I ignored the pain in my leg and the pleading look in her eyes. I turned to Brad, who looked completely confused. He was holding a rib halfway to his mouth, looking from his wife to his father-in-law. "Wait," he said, his brow furrowing. "Stole? Nia, what do you mean?" "Ebony told me Otis gave us that card as a wedding gift. She said it was a family account." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A family account. Brad, look around you. Does this look like a family that has an $80,000 limit just lying around? Otis has not paid a bill on time since 1999. You are currently vacationing on a felony. My sister stole my social security number, forged my signature, and opened 3 credit cards in my name. Every single thing you have enjoyed for the last 6 months, from that trip to the watch on your wrist, is evidence in a fraud case." Ebony slammed her hand on the table. "Shut up, Nia. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me." She looked at our parents, desperate for backup. "Mom! Dad, tell her to stop lying. Tell Brad she is making this up." All eyes turned to Otis, the patriarch, the man who was supposedly funding this lavish lifestyle. He wiped barbecue sauce from his lip with a napkin, looking annoyed not at the thief, but at the victim. He looked at me with deep disappointment, as if I were the one who had just ruined the family reputation. The silence was shattered not by an apology, but by a fist slamming against the table so hard the silverware jumped. I looked up to see my father standing over me, his face twisted in a rage I had not seen since I was a teenager. But he was not looking at Ebony. He was glaring directly at me. "Nia, have you lost your mind?" Otis shouted, his voice booming across the patio. "Doing this in front of company, in front of Brad. Have you no shame?" I blinked, genuinely confused. "I just told you she stole $80,000 from me, Dad. She committed a felony." Otis waved his hand dismissively, as if I had complained about the weather. "Oh, stop with the legal mumbo-jumbo. She is your sister. She borrowed a card. So what? You are sitting there in a penthouse making 6 figures, driving a Mercedes, and you are going to destroy your sister. Is marriage over a few bills? You are greedy, Nia. That is your problem. You have always thought you were better than us because you have that fancy degree." My jaw literally dropped. I stared at him, feeling the air leave my lungs. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. In 30 seconds, he had turned a federal crime into a question of my generosity. I was no longer the victim of identity theft. I was the villain who refused to share my abundance. I looked at Brad, hoping he would see the insanity of this, but he just looked uncomfortable, shrinking into his seat like a child watching his parents fight. Otis leaned in closer, his finger pointing in my face. We are a family, Naya. We help each other. Ebony needed a little help to get settled. She is trying to build a life, a family. You should be proud to support her instead of coming here and acting like a debt collector. What is wrong with you? Since when did money become more important to you than your own flesh and blood? Viola chimed in, then her voice trembling with that fake sweetness she used to smooth over cracks in the foundation. Now Otis, calm down. Nia is just tired. She works too hard. She did not mean to upset everyone. Nia, baby, put those papers away. You are ruining the digestion. Just apologize to your sister for making a scene, and we can work out a payment plan later. Apologize. The word hung in the humid air like a toxic cloud. They wanted me to apologize to the person who had robbed me. That was the moment the umbilical cord finally snapped. I looked at my father, a man who had taught me to ride a bike and balance a checkbook. He did not see a daughter. He saw an ATM machine with a pulse. He saw a safety net for his golden child. He was willing to sacrifice my financial standing, my career, and my freedom just to keep Ebony's fantasy alive. He thought he could bully me into silence like he did when I was 12. But I was not 12 anymore. And I was not holding the checkbook. I was holding the evidence. Brad looked at me, then at Otis, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. The narrative was cracking, and for a split second I thought he might actually see the truth. Wait a minute, he said, his voice slow and uncertain. I thought this was a corporate card. You told me it was a perk from the Family Business Trust. Why is Nia talking about theft? Ebony did not miss a beat. She is a virtuoso of deception. She reached out and placed her hand on Brad's arm, squeezing it gently to pull his focus away from the facts. Oh, honey, she sighed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I did not want to tell you this because I did not want to embarrass her. She gestured vaguely in my direction. Nia has been having some professional trouble. She lost a major client last month. She is broke, Brad. She is drowning. I stood there, mouth slightly open, marveling at the sheer creativity of the lie. I had just received a promotion and a bonus last week, yet here I was being painted as a destitute failure. Ebony continued, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. She gave me permission to use that card when things were good. Now that she is struggling, she is too proud to ask for help, so she is inventing this story about theft to get the money back without admitting she failed. It is just sad, really. She is jealous of our happiness because she is all alone in that big, empty apartment. The transformation in Brad's face was immediate and devastating. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a look of condescending pity that felt like a physical slap. He looked at me not with anger, but with the charity one reserves for a stray dog. Oh, Nia, he said softly, shaking his head. That is really low. If you were struggling, you should have just asked us. We are family. We would have loaned you some money. You did not have to make up a crime just to cover your rent. He reached for his wallet, actually pulling out $100 bill as if to tip me for my performance. That gesture broke the last thread of my restraint. They had not just stolen my money, they had stolen my dignity. They had rewritten my reality so thoroughly that the victim had become the beggar. I looked at the crisp bill in his hand, then at my parents who were nodding in agreement with this fabrication. There was no point in arguing. You cannot use logic to fight a delusion this powerful. I realized then that my parents would rather see me humiliated than see Ebony held accountable. They would protect her lie, even if it cost me my reputation. I picked up my bag, the leather strap feeling heavy in my hand. I did not take the money. I did not say another word to Brad. I had one move left, and it was not a conversation, it was a nuclear option. I stared at the money in Brad's hand. That single bill was the ultimate insult. It was the price tag they had put on my dignity, $100 to shut up and play along with their delusion. I realized then that explaining myself was useless. They were committed to the lie, so I decided to commit to the truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I did not text a friend or check my email. I dialed the number for American Express Platinum Services and I pressed the speaker button. The electronic ringtone pierced the humid air louder than the cicadas, louder than the sizzling grill. Otis took a step forward. "Who are you calling, Nia? Put that phone away." I ignored him. A polite female voice filled the patio. "Thank you for calling American Express. How can I help you today?" I spoke clearly and slowly so there would be no mistake. "My name is Nia King. I am reporting that my identity has been stolen and used to open fraudulent accounts. I need to freeze my credit profile and flag all recent activity as criminal fraud immediately." The silence at the table was absolute. Brad dropped his hand, the money fluttering to the table. Ebony looked like she was going to be sick. The operator replied, "I understand, Ms. King. We take this very seriously. I am locking down all accounts associated with your social security number right now. Any active cards will be declined instantly. Do you want to proceed with a fraud investigation?" "Yes," I said, looking directly at my sister. "Proceed with full prosecution." Otis lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. "You ungrateful brat," he hissed. "Hang up! You are going to ruin everything." It was too late. A loud ping echoed from the table. It was Ebony's phone. She looked down at the screen and her face went gray. It was a notification from the mobile spa service she had booked for later that afternoon. "Payment declined. Contact your financial institution." Her facade cracked. The reality of what I had done hit her. The free ride was over. The magic money faucet had just been turned off. She looked up at me with pure terror in her eyes. Not because she was sorry, but because she was broke. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. I did not say goodbye. I did not hug my mother. I looked at Brad one last time. "Keep your money, Brad. You are going to need it when they come to repossess that truck in the driveway." I turned on my heel and walked back through the house. Behind me, I heard the explosion of shouting as the family I was leaving behind began to turn on each other. I got into my car, locked the doors, and for the first time in months, I breathed easy. The war had started, and I had just fired the first shot. The following week, I walked into the glass tower of First National Bank with a leather portfolio tucked under my arm. Inside were the architectural blueprints for my new office space. This was supposed to be the coronation of my 10-year career. I had spent a decade working out of spare rooms and coffee shops, building my reputation as the sharpest forensic accountant in Atlanta. Now, I was finally ready to sign the lease on a commercial suite in Midtown. I felt powerful. I felt successful. I walked into the office of Mr. Henderson, the senior loan officer who had managed my accounts for 5 years. Usually he greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile. Today, he did not even stand up. "Please sit down, Nia," he said, his voice flat and professional. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask about business. He simply slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. It was face down. I picked it up expecting to see the final approval for my construction loan. Instead, I saw a rejection notice. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes. I scanned down to the bottom of the page where the credit bureau data was listed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Current FICO score, 520. I stared at the number. 520. 7 days ago, my score was 810. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, fighting to keep my voice steady. "There is a mistake. I have never missed a payment in my life. I have zero debt. You know my financials better than anyone." Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. "There is no mistake. Your report shows 3 credit cards maxed out to their limit. Your credit utilization is over 100%. And because you filed a police report for identity theft last week, your entire profile is flagged with a fraud alert. But that proves I am the victim." I argued, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I did not spend that money. My identity was stolen." "In the eyes of the bank, you are not a victim," he replied coldly. "You are a liability. We cannot underwrite a $500,000 commercial loan for someone with a volatility flag and a subprime credit score. You are currently categorized as high risk. If we lend to you, we are gambling, and banks do not gamble. High risk? The words felt like a physical slap. I sat back in the chair, the blueprint slipping from my lap onto the floor. It was not just about the office. I am a forensic accountant. My license, my credibility, and my entire professional existence depend on financial integrity. If my clients found out I had the credit score of a college dropout with a gambling addiction, I would be unhireable. My sister had not just stolen $80,000. She had placed a bomb under the foundation of my career and detonated it. I walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. The humidity wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I walked to my car and threw the useless blueprints into the back seat. My dream office was gone. My reputation was hanging by a thread. I realized then that this was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a fight for my survival. Ebony and my parents were probably at home right now painting me as the villain. They had no idea that their greed had just cost me everything I had worked for. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was not going to let them win. If they wanted to make me high risk, I would show them exactly how dangerous I could be. By the time I returned to my apartment, my phone had become a device of psychological warfare. In narcissistic family systems, there is a term for the people the abuser recruits to do their dirty work. They are called flying monkeys, named after the witch's henchmen in The Wizard of Oz. My family had dispatched an entire battalion of them. My notifications were a sea of angry texts from aunts, cousins, and distant relatives who usually only called me when they needed tax advice. Now suddenly they were all experts on morality and sisterhood. Aunt Patrice, a woman who had not spoken to me since Christmas 2 years ago, left a voicemail that was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She screamed that I was cold-blooded. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing I was dragging my baby sister through the mud over a few credit card bills. She called me the devil in a designer suit. Uncle Bernard sent a text message written entirely in capital letters, telling me that I had forgotten where I came from and that God does not like ugly. It was a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm me, to make me doubt my own sanity. Then came the lie that took the manipulation to a microscopic level of cruelty. My cousin Tasha sent a message that made me freeze in the middle of my living room. She asked if I was happy now that I had put so much stress on Ebony that she might lose the baby. I stared at the screen. The baby? There was no baby. Ebony had been drinking margaritas in Cabo 2 weeks ago. I saw the photos. But that did not matter to the mob. My parents and Ebony had concocted a fake pregnancy to turn me into a monster. To the rest of the family, I was not a victim of fraud. I was a heartless shrew endangering an unborn child over money. The final blow came from my mother, Viola. She did not scream. She sent a 3-minute voice note. I sat on my sofa in the dark and played it. Her voice was thick with tears, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She talked about her labor pains when she birthed me. She talked about how she sacrificed her figure and her youth to raise me. She asked where she went wrong to raise a daughter who would choose a bank account over her own flesh and blood. She said I was breaking her heart and that if anything happened to Ebony or the baby, the blood would be on my hands. I listened to the entire message without shedding a tear. A year ago, this guilt trip would have crushed me. I would have called them back, apologized, and paid off the debt just to stop the emotional bleeding. But tonight, listening to my mother weaponize her own motherhood to protect a thief, I felt nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. They were not calling to check on me. They were not asking how I was going to fix my credit or save my business. They were calling to force me back into my role as the silent provider. They did not love me. They loved my compliance, and that was the one thing I could no longer afford to give them. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb and poured myself a glass of water. If they wanted a villain, I would give them one they would never forget. The next morning, the security guard at my building called up to say my father was in the lobby. Before I could tell him to send him away, the elevator doors down the hall dinged. Otis marched toward my glass-walled office like a man coming to evict a squatter. He was wearing his Sunday suit, but his face was twisted with Monday morning rage. He did not knock. He shoved the heavy glass door open so hard it bounced against the stopper, vibrating the floorboards beneath my feet. My assistant looked up in alarm, but I waved her off. This was a private war. Otis did not say hello. He slammed his hand on my mahogany desk, leaning over me with the imposing physical presence that used to terrify me as a child. You need to call the police and retract that report immediately, Nia. This has gone far enough. You are embarrassing us. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I was not going to let him tower over me. I am not embarrassing anyone, Dad. Ebony committed a felony. I just lost a commercial loan because of her. My credit score is in the gutter. My business is at risk. Do you even care that your daughter might lose her livelihood? Otis scoffed, waving his hand as if my career was a hobby. You can get another loan. You are smart. You always figure it out. But Ebony cannot get another husband like Brad. I stared at him, stunned by the naked favoritism. So that is what this is about. Protecting Brad is delicate ego. It is about protecting your sister is life. Otis shouted, his voice cracking. If the police show up, Brad will find out she lied about the money. He will find out we are not rich. He will leave her, Nia. Do you want your sister to be a divorced single mother? Is that what you want? To destroy this family over money? I looked at this man, my father, and realized he did not care that I was the victim. He only cared that I was the whistleblower. He was asking me to absorb an $80,000 loss and a criminal record just to keep up appearances for a son-in-law he barely knew. I walked around my desk and stood toe-to-toe with him. I am not destroying this family, Dad. You are. You taught Ebony that she could steal without consequences. You taught her that appearances matter more than character, and now you are asking me to light my career on fire to keep her warm. The answer is no. I am not retracting the report. If Brad leaves her, that is the consequence of her lies, not my truth. Otis turned purple. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are a cold woman, Nia. If you send your sister to jail, you are dead to me. Do you hear me? You will have no father. He turned and stormed out, knocking over a potted plant on his way. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of relief. He threatened that I would have no father, but as I looked at the empty doorway, I realized I had not had a father in a long time. I only had a man who saw me as an insurance policy for his favorite child, and that policy had just expired. That evening I pulled into the resident parking garage of my building, hoping for silence. But as I rounded the corner to my assigned spot, I saw a white Range Rover parked diagonally across the lines, blocking me in. I did not need to check the license plate. It was Ebony. She stepped out of the vehicle before I could even put my car in park. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere set that I knew cost more than my first car, and on her arm was the orange Hermes bag that was currently the subject of a fraud investigation. She did not look like a woman afraid of the police. She looked like a woman who was annoyed that her credit card had been declined. I rolled down my window, not bothering to turn off the engine. Move your car, Ebony, I said, keeping my voice low. I am not in the mood for round two. She walked right up to my door, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. You are really going through with this, aren't you? You are really going to let the bank come after me? I looked at her, searching for a shred of remorse. There was none. Only indignation. It is not about letting the bank come after you, I replied. It is about you stealing $80,000. Ebony laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Stealing. God, you are so dramatic. It is not stealing if family uses it. Besides, what do you need that money for anyway? Look at you. You are 32 years old, Nia. You are single. You have no kids. You live in this big, cold apartment all by yourself. Who are you saving for? A husband who does not exist. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. She was using my independence, the very thing I had worked so hard for, as a justification for robbing me. In her twisted logic, my lack of a husband and children meant I did not deserve to keep my own money. I need that money to maintain the life I built without anyone's help, I said, gripping the steering wheel. Ebony rolled her eyes. You are selfish. That is what you are. I have a husband. I have a reputation to maintain. Brad's family comes from money, Nia. Real money. I cannot let him know I am broke. I need to look the part. If I do not have the right clothes, the right car, the right vacations, I do not fit in. You are ruining my life because you are jealous that I actually snagged a man. I shook my head, marveling at her delusion. You are not maintaining an image, Ebony. You are committing felonies. And for the record, Mom and Dad cannot give you permission to commit identity theft. That is not how the law works. Ebony smirked, straightening up and adjusting her designer sunglasses. That shows what you know. Mom and Dad are the heads of this family. If they say it is a loan, it is a loan. No judge is going to convict me when our own parents testify that they authorized it. You are going to look like a fool in court, Nia. Just a lonely, bitter spinster trying to sue her baby sister. She got back into her Range Rover and slammed the door. As she peeled out of the garage, leaving tire marks on the concrete, I realized she truly believed she was untouchable. She thought the laws of our dysfunctional family superseded the laws of the United States government. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. 2 days later, the final nail in the coffin arrived, via certified mail. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the thick envelope with the red urgent stamp on the front. It was not from a credit card company. It was from a major automotive lender. My hands shook slightly as I ripped open the seal. I unfolded the document, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was a notice of default and intent to repossess. I scanned the document, my eyes widening with every line. The vehicle in question was a $70,000 Ford F-150 Raptor. The primary borrower was listed as Bradley Miller. The CO signer was listed as Nia King. I had to grab the counter to steady myself. A truck. They had bought a truck. I remembered when Brad pulled up in that monster of a vehicle at Christmas. He had been so proud revving the engine, telling everyone that business was booming at the gym, and he wanted to treat himself. We had all congratulated him. Otis had patted him on the back. Ebony had beamed like a proud wife. And all the while my name was on the loan. I looked closer at the copy of the contract attached to the notice. There at the bottom was my signature. Or rather, a terrifyingly accurate forgery of my signature. Ebony must have practiced it for hours. She had signed my life away so her husband could drive a tank through the suburbs. But the most damning part was the payment history. Brad had missed the last 2 payments. The rich husband, the man my father was so desperate to protect, could not even make the note on the truck he was pretending to afford. The audacity was suffocating. Ebony had not just used my credit for luxury purses or vacations. She had legally tethered me to a depreciating asset that I had never even driven. If that truck got repossessed, the repossession would go on my record. It would stay there for 7 years. I would be branded financially irresponsible because my brother-in-law could not keep up with the lie my sister had constructed. I looked at the date on the default notice. They had 24 hours to pay the arrears, or the truck would be seized. I felt a cold, dangerous calm settle over me. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was financial enslavement. They were treating me like a silent partner in their fraudulent life, expecting me to absorb the cost of their fantasies forever. I realized then that my father was right about one thing. I was going to destroy the family. But not because I was vindictive, but because I refused to be the collateral damage for their ego. I picked up the notice and walked to my desk. I did not call the bank to pay it. I put the document in the file for the police. If they wanted the truck so badly, they could explain to the authorities how they bought it. The gloves were officially off. I walked into my parents' house expecting a screaming match. Instead, I found a scene that was terrifyingly calm. Otis and Viola were sitting at the dining room table, their hands clasped together on top of a single piece of paper. Ebony was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, she was hiding in her room or at the mall, letting her parents clean up her mess as usual. "Sit down," Nia Otis said. his voice dropping to a gravelly baritone he usually reserved for church announcements. "We have found a solution. We are going to fix this mess so everyone walks away happy." I remain standing, keeping my purse on my shoulder. I doubt that, Dad. Unless the solution is Ebony handing me a cashier's check for $150,000 to cover the credit cards and the truck loan, I do not see how we are going to fix this. Viola pushed the paper across the table toward me. It was not a typed legal document. It was a piece of yellow legal pad paper torn at the top, covered in my father's sloppy handwriting. It looked like a grocery list, not a financial agreement. "Read it." Viola urged, a desperate smile plastered on her face. "It is a loan agreement. If you sign this, it proves to the police that there was no theft. It proves you gave Ebony permission to use the money. The police will have to drop the investigation, and the bank will stop harassing you because it becomes a private family matter." I looked down at the scribbled ink. The terms were so insulting they were almost funny. The document stated that I, Nia King, retroactively agreed to loan Ebony King the sum of $150,000. In exchange, Ebony agreed to pay me back in monthly installments. I scanned to the bottom line to see the amount. $50 a month. I blinked, sure I had misread it. I did the math in my head instantly. At $50 a month, it would take Ebony 3,000 months to pay off the principal alone. That is 250 years. They were asking me to sign a contract that would not be paid off until the year 2276. I looked up at my father, waiting for the punchline. "This is a joke, right? You want me to sign a document saying I agreed to lend her money with a repayment plan that takes 2.5 centuries? It is not about the money," Nia Otis snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "It is about the principle. It is about keeping your sister out of handcuffs. If you sign this, the fraud charges vanish. You save the family reputation. Ebony will pay you what she can. $50 is better than nothing." "No," I said, my voice shaking with rage. $50 is an insult. This piece of paper is not a contract. It is evidence of conspiracy. You are asking me to commit perjury. You want me to lie to the police and say I authorized this spending so Ebony can walk free while I spend the rest of my life paying off her debt. You are asking me to set myself on fire so she does not have to feel a little bit of heat. Viola stood up, tears streaming down her face again. "Just sign the paper, Nia. Why do you have to be so difficult? She is your sister." I looked at the wrinkled yellow paper, then at the parents who were supposed to protect me. They did not care about my financial future. They did not care that I would be blacklisted by every bank in America for having a massive defaulted loan. They only cared about protecting the golden child from the consequences of her own greed. I reached out and picked up the paper. Otis smiled, thinking he had won, thinking he had bullied me into submission one last time. He was wrong. The sound of tearing paper was the only thing that filled the room. I did not just rip the yellow legal pad in half, I shredded it. I tore through the sloppy handwriting, the insulting terms, and the delusion that my family could buy my silence for $50 a month. I let the pieces flutter down onto the dining table like confetti at a funeral. Otis stood up so fast his chair knocked against the china cabinet. "What are you doing?" he bellowed, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "That was your way out, Nia. That was your only chance to save your relationship with this family." I looked him dead in the eye and felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. In their place was the cold, hard resolve of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. "I do not want your $50, Dad," I said, my voice steady and lethal. "I do not want your payment plan. And I certainly do not want a relationship with a family that treats me like a criminal for refusing to be a victim. You just tried to coerce me into signing a fraudulent contract to cover up a felony. Do you know what that makes you? It makes you an accessory to the crime." Viola let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Nia, baby, do not talk like that. We are just trying to help." "You are helping Ebony," I corrected her. "You are helping her destroy my life to save her own. But that stops now." I picked up my purse and slung it over my shoulder. I am not signing anything, I am not accepting any deals. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I am walking into the Fulton County Police Department. I am filing a formal affidavit of identity theft against Ebony King. I am handing over the credit card statements. I am handing over the forged truck loan documents. And I am telling them exactly how my parents tried to intimidate me into silence. Otis slammed his fist on the table again. You will not do it. You do not have the guts to send your own sister to jail. Think about Brad. Think about the baby. I paused at the door and looked back at them one last time. There is no baby, Mom. And as for Brad, maybe he deserves to know who he really married. I suggest you tell Ebony to pack a bag, not for a vacation, but for a very long stay in a very small room, and you might want to save that $50. You are going to need it for her commissary account. I walked out of the house and into the night air. Behind me, I heard my mother start to scream a high-pitched sound of panic that signaled the end of their charade. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were not shaking. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had given them an ultimatum, but I already knew the answer. They had chosen the lie. Now I was going to choose justice. The war did not end when I drove away from my parents' house. In fact, it simply moved to a new battlefield, the internet. Later that night, as I sat in my living room organizing my legal files, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It was not a call. It was a flood of notifications from Facebook. I opened the app and felt my stomach drop. My mother Viola had decided to take our private family dispute and broadcast it to the congregation of Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church. She had posted a long, rambling status update in the church prayer group. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She wrote that she was asking for prayer warriors to intercede for her oldest daughter, Nia, who had lost her way. She claimed that the devil had taken hold of my heart through the love of money. She wrote that I had abandoned my family in their time of need and was threatening to destroy my younger sister's marriage out of pure jealousy and spite. She did not mention the $80,000 in credit card debt. She did not mention the forged signature on the truck loan. She simply painted a picture of a wealthy, heartless daughter attacking her struggling, innocent sister. I scrolled through the comments, each one a fresh stab in the back. These were people I had known my entire life. Sunday school teachers, deacons, neighbors who had watched me grow up. And they were tearing me apart. Sister Patterson wrote that she always knew I was too proud for my own good. Deacon Jones commented that money is the root of all evil, and he would pray for my soul to be softened. They were judging me, condemning me, and gossiping about me without knowing a single fact. My mother was liking every single comment, fueling the fire, basking in the sympathy of her digital echo chamber. She was willing to destroy my reputation in the community just to validate her own narrative of victimhood. Then came the text from Brad. It popped up at the top of my screen, interrupting my reading of the church group comments. It was a paragraph of pure venom. He called me a selfish witch. He told me that Ebony had been crying for hours, terrified that I was actually going to call the police. He asked how I could sleep at night, knowing I was tearing a family apart over money that I did not even need. He wrote that he used to respect me, but now he saw me for what I really was. A lonely, bitter woman who wanted everyone else to be as miserable as she was. I stared at the words on the screen. A part of me wanted to reply. I wanted to text him back and tell him to check the glove compartment of his truck for the loan documents. I wanted to tell him that his wife was a felon and his in-laws were liars. But I stopped myself. Engaging with them now would only give them more ammunition. They were baiting me. They wanted an emotional reaction so they could point and say, "See, she is unstable." Instead of typing a reply, I took a screenshot. I screenshotted Brad is abusive text. I screenshotted my mother is libelous Facebook post. I screenshotted every single comment from the church members who were participating in this smear campaign. I was not just building a case for financial fraud anymore. I was building a timeline of harassment. They thought they were shaming me into submission. They thought that if they made me look bad enough, I would drop the charges to save face. They were wrong. Every lie they told, every insult they typed, was just another piece of evidence that would look fantastic projected on a screen in a court of law. I saved the images to a cloud folder named Evidence. Then I turned off my phone, went into my bedroom, and laid out my suit for the morning. They wanted a villain. Tomorrow, they were going to get a prosecutor. The sun was barely up when I stood in front of my closet choosing my armor for the day. I did not pick a dress or a cardigan. I chose my sharpest charcoal gray suit, the one I usually reserved for hostile takeovers and federal audits. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun and applied a coat of crimson lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a heartbroken daughter or a jealous sister. I saw a forensic accountant who was about to close the biggest case of her career. I drove to the Fulton County Police Department in silence. The radio was off. My phone was off. I needed absolute focus. Walking into the precinct, the air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. It was a stark contrast to the perfumed, manicured world my sister was trying to fake, but to me, it smelled like justice. I walked up to the front desk and asked to speak with a detective in the fraud division. Detective Miller was a tired-looking man with kind eyes and a desk buried under paperwork. He gestured for me to sit down, looking like he expected another routine case of a stolen wallet or a phishing scam. He had no idea what I was about to put on his desk. I did not start with a sob story. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a binder that was 3 inches thick. It landed on his metal desk with a heavy, authoritative thud. I opened it to the first page, which contained a summary of the $80,000 in credit card debt, the $70,000 truck loan, and the notarized affidavit I had drafted myself. Detective Miller, I said, my voice steady and clear. I am here to file a formal criminal complaint for identity theft, credit card fraud, and forgery. He opened the file, his eyebrows raising as he saw the level of detail. I had color-coded the transactions. I had cross-referenced them with social media posts. I had attached the text messages where my family admitted to the spending. "Who is the suspect?" he asked, reaching for his pen. I took a deep breath. This was the moment of no return. Once I said the names, there was no going back to Sunday dinners or Christmas mornings. But then I remembered the smirk on Ebony's face. I remembered my father screaming at me. I remembered the smear campaign on Facebook. "The primary suspect is Ebony King, my sister," I stated, cold as ice. "She is the one who opened the accounts and forged the signatures." The detective wrote down her name. "Is that all?" "No," I continued, leaning forward. "I also want to file charges against Otis and Viola King, my parents. They are fully aware of the fraud. They have benefited from the proceeds, and yesterday they attempted to coerce me into signing a false document to cover up the crime. I have included the text messages and the voicemail where my mother admits to the scheme. They are accessories before and after the fact." Detective Miller stopped writing and looked up at me. He studied my face for a moment, looking for hesitation. He found none. "You understand that once we process this, the district attorney will take over," he said softly. "We are talking about felony charges, mandatory prison time. This is your family." I looked at the badge on his chest. "I know exactly who they are, detective, and I know exactly what they did. They made their choice when they decided my credit score was more important than my consent. Now I am making mine. File the charges." 2 days later, the facade of the perfect King family finally crumbled, and it happened in the most spectacular way possible. Ebony was attending a baby shower for her best friend at the exclusive Buckhead Country Club. It was exactly the kind of event she lived for. A room full of Atlanta is social climbers, endless champagne, and a photographer capturing every curated moment for Instagram. Ebony was wearing a pastel yellow dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, laughing and holding court near the dessert table. She looked radiant, completely unbothered by the fact that she was a criminal. She likely thought my threat was a bluff. She thought her big sister would never actually pull the trigger. She was wrong. Just as Ebony picked up the silver knife to help the mother to be cut the 3-tiered fondant cake, The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. The room fell silent, expecting perhaps a surprise guest or a hired entertainer. Instead, 4 uniformed officers from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department marched in. The sound of their heavy boots on the polished hardwood floor echoed like thunder in the quiet room. They did not look at the decorations. They scanned the crowd with professional indifference until their eyes landed on the woman in the yellow dress. Ebony King, the lead officer, boomed his voice, carrying to the back of the room. Ebony froze the cake knife, hovering in mid-air. She offered a confused, shaky smile. "Yes." "Who are you?" The officer did not smile back. He walked right up to the dessert table, stepping over a pile of discarded gift wrap. "Ms. King, I have a warrant for your arrest. Please put down the knife and place your hands behind your back." A collective gasp swept through the room. The silence was instantly replaced by the frantic whispering of 50 wealthy women. Ebony turned pale. She looked at the officer, then at the guests, her eyes wide with panic. "Is this a joke?" she stammered. "Did Brad hire you guys? Is this a stripper thing?" "I assure you this is not a joke," the officer said, reaching for his belt. "You are being charged with 3 counts of identity theft, first-degree forgery, and credit card fraud. Now turn around." The reality hit her like a physical blow. She dropped the knife. It clattered loudly against the china platter, slicing through a sugar flower. As the officer grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back, the cold metallic click of handcuffs cut through the air. Brad, who had been standing near the bar holding a glass of scotch, went rigid. His face drained of all color. His grip on his glass went slack and it slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The crash was deafening. He stared at his wife, the woman he thought was an heiress, now being treated like a common thief in front of their entire social circle. Ebony began to struggle as they marched her toward the door. She did not cry. She screamed. And her words confirmed everything I had told the police. She did not say she was innocent. She screamed my name. "Nia did this," she shrieked, her face twisted and ugly. "My sister is setting me up. She is jealous. Tell them, Brad. Tell them I have money." But Brad did not say a word. He just stood there, surrounded by broken glass, watching the illusion of his perfect life walk out the door in handcuffs. The humiliation was absolute. The secret was out. And for the first time in her life, Ebony was about to go somewhere where Daddy could not pay the bill. The following weeks were a masterclass in misplaced loyalty. My father Otis, a man who had pinched pennies his entire life, suddenly opened the floodgates of his finances. He did not do it to pay me back. He did not do it to settle the debt. He did it to declare war on me. Neighbors reported seeing a for sale sign on his beloved 1968 Chevrolet pickup truck, a vehicle he had spent 20 years restoring. He sold it for cash in less than 24 hours. Then my mother was seen at the local bank branch weeping as she signed the paperwork to liquidate a significant portion of their retirement savings. They were bleeding themselves dry, not to fix the problem, but to crush the person who pointed it out. They used every cent to hire Marcus Sterling. He was the kind of criminal defense attorney whose billboards littered the highway, promising to make felonies disappear if you had enough cash. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, known for aggressive tactics and victim blaming. My parents were not just looking for a defense. They were looking for a hitman to assassinate my character in open court. Word got back to me through the few family members who were still speaking to me. The strategy they were concocting was sickeningly brilliant. They knew they could not deny the spending. The credit card receipts and the truck loan had Ebony's signature all over them. So they decided to attack the intent. Their narrative was that I was an unstable, lonely woman who used money to buy affection. They planned to claim that I had given Ebony full access to my accounts during a manic episode of generosity, only to revoke it when I became jealous of her pregnancy and her happy marriage. They were going to paint me as mentally erratic, a woman who gave gifts and then called the police when she did not get enough attention in return. It hurt. I will not lie. Watching my parents bankrupt their own future to pay a lawyer to call me crazy was a specific kind of heartbreak I would not wish on my worst enemy. They were willing to spend $50,000 on a lawyer rather than simply admitting that Ebony owed me money. They were betting their golden years on the hope that a jury would hate me more than they loved the truth. I sat in my apartment looking at the photos of the truck my father had sold. He loved that truck more than he loved me, and now the money from its sale was being used to destroy me. I closed the blinds and turned off the lights. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. But they forgot that every villain has an origin story, and mine started with them. The Fulton County Superior Courtroom was freezing. It was a calculated chill designed to keep tempers low, but as I sat behind the prosecutor's table, I could feel the heat radiating from the defense bench. This was no longer a family dispute discussed over barbecue and sweet tea. This was the state of Georgia versus Ebony King. The oak-paneled walls and the heavy seal of the court looming above the judge's bench made the stakes terrifyingly real. There were no parents here to ground us. There was only the law. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal suit and looked across the aisle. My family had transformed for the occasion. Ebony had abandoned her flashy designer labels for the day. She was wearing a modest navy cardigan and a simple pearl necklace, a costume carefully curated by her high-priced defense attorney to make her look like a misunderstood Sunday school teacher rather than a felon. She had a tissue clutched in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes every time a jury member looked her way. It was a performance, but I had to admit she was good at it. Sitting directly behind her were Otis and Viola. My father did not blink. He stared at the back of my head with a hatred so palpable it made the hairs on my neck stand up. He was not looking at me like a daughter he had raised. He was looking at me like a traitor he wanted to execute. My mother was clutching a Bible, her lips moving in silent performative prayer, ensuring everyone in the gallery saw her piety. They were presenting a united front, a fortress of delusion built to protect their golden child from the consequences of her actions. But there was a crack in their armor. I shifted my gaze to the back row of the gallery. Brad was sitting there alone. He was not sitting with my parents. He was not leaning forward to comfort his wife. He was slumped in the corner wearing a wrinkled shirt, looking like a man who had not slept in days. His eyes were red, darting back and forth between the weeping figure of Ebony and the stoic profile of me. For the first time he looked unsure. The expensive truck was gone, likely hidden or surrendered. The lavish vacations were over. And now, sitting in this cold room, the reality of his wife's deception was finally starting to outweigh her charm. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "The Honorable Judge Sharon Thomas presiding." We all stood as Judge Thomas swept into the room. She was a stern black woman in her 60s, with keen eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom, her gaze lingering for a moment on the theatrical weeping of my sister. She did not look impressed. "Be seated," Judge Thomas commanded. "We are here for the matter of the state versus King. Charges include identity theft, credit card fraud, and first-degree forgery. Mr. Sterling, is the defense ready?" Ebony's lawyer stood up, buttoning his $1,000 suit. "We are ready, Your Honor. And we intend to prove that this entire misunderstanding is a civil matter between sisters, not a crime." I clenched my hands under the table. They were really doing it. They were going to look a judge in the eye and lie. I took a deep breath, centering myself. They had their story, but I had the receipts. Let the show begin. Mr. Sterling rose from his seat with the grace of a viper uncoiling. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the jury box, his movements practiced and smooth. He did not look at his client, the crying woman in the cardigan. He looked directly at me, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury." Sterling began, his voice rich and baritone, filling the courtroom. "We are here today because the state wants you to believe that a crime has been committed. They want you to believe that Ebony King is a thief who preyed upon her own flesh and blood. but the evidence will show that this is not a case of theft. It is not a case of fraud. It is simply a case of buyer is remorse. He paced in front of the jury, making eye contact with the foreman. The truth is simple. Nia King is a wealthy, successful woman. She loves her sister. Or at least she did. On numerous occasions, Nia gave Ebony explicit verbal permission to use her financial credentials. She provided the card numbers. She provided the PIN codes. In the state of Georgia, a verbal contract is binding. When you hand someone the keys to your car, you cannot call the police and report it stolen just because they drove it somewhere you did not like. I sat there stone-faced, digging my fingernails into my palms. It was a brilliant, disgusting lie. He was taking the fact that I had helped Ebony with small things in the past, a few groceries, a tank of gas, and stretching it to cover $80,000 in luxury goods. Sterling pivoted, pointing a finger at me. But something changed. Relationships soured. Jealousy crept in. The defense will present witness testimony from the parents, Mr. and Mrs. King, who were present when these agreements were made. They will testify that Nia King authorized these expenses as gifts. But when Nia became envious of her sister's marriage and her growing family, she decided to weaponize the legal system to punish her. She revoked her permission retroactively. She is using this court to settle a personal score. This is not justice, ladies and gentlemen. This is a temper tantrum thrown by a woman who has everything except the one thing her sister has: love. A murmur went through the jury. I saw a few jurors look at me with suspicion. Sterling had done his job. He had planted the seed of doubt. He had turned the cold, hard facts of credit card statements into a murky, emotional swamp. I looked at Ebony. She had stopped crying long enough to look at the jury, her face a mask of tragic innocence. They were gambling everything on this narrative. They were betting that the jury would believe a mother and father over a single childless career woman. It was a strong strategy, but it had one fatal flaw. It relied entirely on the credibility of three people who were about to walk into a perjury trap. I took a deep breath and scribbled a note to the prosecutor. Let them talk. Let them dig the hole deep enough to bury themselves. Viola King took the stand with the slow, deliberate gait of a martyr walking to the cross. She was clutching a handkerchief in her left hand and a worn leather Bible in her right. As she placed her hand on the holy book to be sworn in, she closed her eyes for a moment, performing a silent prayer that the entire courtroom was meant to see. It was a masterclass in manipulation. To the jury, she was a heartbroken mother forced to testify in a tragedy. To me, she was a woman about to commit a felony to save her favorite child. Mr. Sterling approached her with exaggerated gentleness, treating her like a fragile porcelain doll that might shatter if he spoke too loudly. Mrs. King, I know this is difficult for you, he began softly. Can you tell the jury about the relationship between your daughters? Viola dabbed at her eyes, her voice trembling just enough to evoke sympathy. I love both my girls, she said, looking directly at the jury. I raised them in the church. I raised them to share. But Nia has always been difficult. She has always struggled with envy. She loves her sister, but she has a hard time seeing Ebony happy. I felt a knot of nausea tighten in my stomach. She was rewriting history in real time. Sterling nodded, encouraging her to continue. Let us talk about the financial accounts in question, Sterling said. Did you ever witness Nia giving Ebony permission to use her credit information? Viola took a deep breath and looked me dead in the eyes. Yes, she lied. It was last Christmas. We were in the kitchen. Nia was talking about her bonus. She took out her wallet and put it on the counter. She looked at Ebony and said, "What is mine is yours, baby girl. You use whatever you need to get settled. I have plenty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I sat there paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the lie. It never happened. I was not even at their house for Christmas last year. I was in Aspen with friends. But the jury did not know that. They saw a weeping mother swearing on a Bible. Sterling pressed further. So if she gave permission, why are we here today? Why did Nia file these charges? Viola let out a sob that sounded painfully real. Because of Brad, she whispered. When Ebony married Brad, something broke in Nia. Ebony has the beauty. She has the husband. She has the charm. Nia has, well, Nia has her career. But a job does not keep you warm at night. When she saw how happy Ebony was, she wanted to hurt her. She wanted to take away the things that made Ebony shine. This lawsuit is not about money. It is about punishing a sister for having the life Nia always wanted. I looked at the jury box. The shift in the room was palpable. The jurors were no longer looking at me with professional curiosity. They were looking at me with pity and disdain. They saw a bitter, lonely spinster attacking her beautiful, glowing sister out of spite. My mother had successfully weaponized her own motherhood against me. She had painted a picture so compelling that the facts were beginning to blur. I looked at Viola, who was now weeping into her handkerchief, and I realized that the woman who gave me life was willing to destroy it just to win a court case. But as she wiped her tears, I saw her glance quickly at Otis for approval. It was a tiny, fleeting look, but it confirmed everything. This was scripted, and they had no idea that I held the one piece of paper that would turn their script into a confession. The courtroom remained silent as Viola returned to her seat, clutching her Bible like a shield. The jury looked moved by her performance of maternal heartbreak. But as I scanned the room, I noticed that the person most affected by the testimony was not a juror, it was Brad. For the last hour he had been sitting in the back row stiff as a board. But now, as the defense rested its narrative on the idea of a verbal agreement, I saw the blood drain from his face. I could practically hear the ceramic tiles of his perfect life cracking under the weight of the truth. He was not looking at his wife with sympathy anymore. He was staring at the back of her neck with a look of dawning horror. I knew exactly what was happening inside his head. The cognitive dissonance was finally breaking. For months he had accepted the comfortable lies because the truth was too painful to consider. But now, hearing my mother claim that I had openly given Ebony permission to use my cards, the math was no longer adding up for him. If I had given permission, why did Ebony always sprint to the mailbox before he got home from work? He must have remembered the times she snatched envelopes from his hand claiming they were just junk mail or birthday surprises. If it was an open agreement between sisters, why did she hide her phone screen every time a notification popped up? Why did she change her passcode 3 times in the last month? I watched him run a hand through his hair, his breathing becoming shallow. He was remembering the truck. When they bought the Ford Raptor, Ebony had told him that I had offered to co-sign as a wedding gift because my credit was stronger. But if I was the jealous, bitter monster my mother just described, why would I have offered to sign a $70,000 loan for them? The contradiction was staring him in the face. The narrative that I was a generous benefactor and the narrative that I was a vindictive shrew could not exist at the same time. He looked over at Otis, who was patting Viola on the back. He looked at the cheap suit my father was wearing, contrasting it with the lavish vacations he was supposedly funding. Brad was a simple man, but he was not stupid. He was realizing that he was the mark. He was the audience for whom this entire play had been written. Every luxury item, every trip, every dinner had been a prop used to keep him satisfied and blinded. Then, for the first time since the trial began, Brad looked at me. He did not glare. He did not sneer. He looked at me with a terrifying mixture of apology and realization. He remembered what I said at the barbecue. "Keep your money, Brad. You are going to need it." He realized that I had not been trying to hurt him. I had been trying to warn him. He sat back in the hard wooden pew, looking like a man who had just woken up in a burning house. He knew something was coming. He did not know about the passport yet, but his gut was telling him that his wife and her parents were lying. And the sick feeling in his stomach was about to get much worse, because the prosecution was about to call the final witness for the defense. The man who would hammer the final nail into their collective coffin. The defense called their final witness, Otis King. My father walked to the stand with the heavy, rhythmic tread of a man who demands respect, even when he does not earn it. He adjusted his suit jacket as he sat down, looking every bit the aggrieved patriarch. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the prosecutor. He looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or recognition. It was the look a general gives to a soldier he is about to sacrifice for the good of the army. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. Mr. Sterling approached the witness stand with a deferential nod. Mr. King, thank you for being here. I know this is painful for you. We need to clear up the timeline of events. Your wife testified that there was a verbal agreement. Can you corroborate that? Otis cleared his throat, his voice deep and steady. He was a better liar than my mother because he actually believed his own authority superseded the law. Yes, I can. I was there. I saw the whole thing. Sterling nodded. Can you tell the jury exactly when this exchange took place? Otis leaned into the microphone. It was July 4th, Independence Day. We were having a barbecue at my house in Southwest Atlanta. The whole family was there. The ribs were on the grill, music was playing. Everyone was having a good time. I sat up straighter in my chair. July 4th. He was committing to a specific date. Sterling pressed for details. And what did you see happen between Nia and Ebony on that day? Otis pointed a callous finger at me. I saw Nia sitting at the picnic table. She had had a few glasses of wine. She was feeling generous. She pulled out her wallet and took out that heavy silver American Express card. She handed it to Ebony right in front of me. I heard her say, "Go ahead and book that trip to Cabo, little sister. You deserve it." Then she took a napkin and wrote down the PIN code. She said, "Treat yourself. It is on me." The courtroom was silent. The jury was captivated. It was a vivid, detailed story. It had the smell of barbecue, the sound of music, and the specific action of writing a PIN code on a napkin. It painted me as a benevolent drunk who regretted her generosity once she sobered up. Sterling asked one final question. Mr. King, are you absolutely certain it was Nia King you saw that day? Otis looked me dead in the eye, a small, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had buried me. He thought his word was the final gospel. I am 100% certain, he declared. I know my own daughter. She was there. She gave the permission. And now she is lying to this court because she is jealous of her sister. I looked down at the table to hide the sudden rush of adrenaline that flooded my veins. He had done it. He had walked right into the trap. He had been so eager to protect Ebony, so eager to destroy my credibility, that he had fabricated a memory on a specific date without checking the calendar. He had just sworn under oath that he saw me in Atlanta on July 4th. He had no idea that he had just handed me the key to his own prison cell. The silence that followed Otis's testimony was heavy and suffocating. It hung over the courtroom like a physical weight. I could feel the energy in the room shift violently against me. The jurors were exchanging looks, subtle nods of understanding that felt like daggers. To them, the story was now complete. A father had stepped forward, sworn on a Bible, and confirmed that his daughter was a liar. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of society, a parent's love is supposed to be unconditional. The idea that a father would sit in a witness box and fabricate a detailed story to frame his own child was almost impossible for a normal person to accept. Therefore, they reasoned, I must be the villain. I must be the jealous, vindictive woman the defense had painted me to be. The prosecutor, a sharp man named David, who had been confident all morning, leaned over to me. His face was pale. We have a problem, Nia, he whispered, keeping his voice low enough that the defense table could not hear. That was compelling. Eyewitness testimony from a patriarch is the gold standard for reasonable doubt. He gave a specific date. He gave specific details about the PIN code on the napkin. If we cannot prove he is lying, we lose. The jury is going to side with the parents. They always do. I looked across the aisle at the defense table. Mr. Sterling was leaning back in his chair, looking satisfied. Ebony was dabbing her eyes again, playing the victim to perfection. And Otis, my father. He was still sitting in the witness stand looking out at the gallery with a smug expression of triumph. He truly believed he had won. He believed that his authority as my father trumped the truth. He had spent his entire life bullying me, gaslighting me, and forcing me to bend to his will. He thought this court case was just another argument at the dinner table where he could shout loud enough to make his version of reality the only one that mattered. But he had made one fatal mistake. Arrogance makes people sloppy. In his desperation to provide a concrete alibi for Ebony, he had anchored his lie to a specific point in time. He had chosen a holiday because it sounded plausible. A family barbecue. July 4th. It was the perfect setting for a lie. I looked back at David. My hands were clenched into fists on top of the mahogany table, but my palms were dry. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap snapping shut. "He is not going to win, David," I whispered back, my voice steady. "He just lost." David looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" "It is his word against yours." "No, it is not," I said, reaching for the heavy black binder I had brought with me. I flipped past the credit card statements. I flipped past the truck loan. I landed on a plastic sleeve containing a document with a government seal. "He said he saw me in his backyard in Atlanta on July 4th, I said, tracing the date on the document with my finger. "He swore under oath that he watched me hand over that card and write down a PIN code at a barbecue." David looked down at the document I was pointing to. His eyes went wide. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Otis King just testified that he saw me in Georgia," I said, looking up at my father one last time. "But on July 4th, I was 4,000 miles away. And unlike his story, I have a federal stamp to prove it." "Cross-examine him, David, and do not show him any mercy, because he certainly did not show me any." The silence in the courtroom was heavy, the kind that usually precedes a verdict. My father sat in the witness box, adjusting his tie, looking for all the world like a man who had just saved the day. He caught my eye and offered a subtle, pitying nod. It was a gesture meant to say that this was for my own good, that he had to lie to teach me a lesson about loyalty. The jury was shifting in their seats, their faces hard and closed off to me. They had bought the story. They believed the grieving parents over the cold corporate daughter. I reached into the inner pocket of my leather portfolio and withdrew a single yellow manila envelope. It was sealed with red tape. It looked innocuous, just paper and glue, but inside was a nuclear warhead. I slid it across the mahogany table toward David. The sound of the paper moving against the wood was barely audible, but to me, it sounded like the click of a safety being disengaged on a loaded weapon. David looked down at the envelope, then up at me. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the certified documents inside. He broke the seal with a sharp tear that echoed in the quiet room. He pulled out the contents, a single sheet of heavy paper, stamped with the official seal of the United States Department of State, along with a high-resolution photograph. His eyes scanned the document rapidly. His eyebrows shot up. The color returned to his cheeks, and a slow, predatory focus sharpened his gaze. He leaned in close to my ear, his voice a low whisper that vibrated with intensity. "Naya, are you absolutely sure about this? Once I enter this into evidence, there is no coming back. This is not just impeaching a witness. This is a kill shot. You will be publicly humiliating your father in a way he will never forgive. You are effectively orphaning yourself right here in this courtroom." I looked past David to the witness stand. Otis was watching us, his brow furrowed slightly, wondering what was in the envelope. He looked so confident in his deception, so sure that his authority as a patriarch protected him from the consequences of perjury. He had chosen to destroy my reputation to save Ebony's lie. He had chosen to sacrifice me on the altar of his ego. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold clarity of the truth. I turned back to David. My voice was steady, devoid of hesitation. Do it. David nodded once. He slipped the document back into the folder, stood up, and buttoned his suit jacket. The transformation was instant. He no longer looked like a lawyer on the ropes. He looked like a hunter who had just cornered his prey. He picked up the file and walked toward the witness stand, his steps echoing on the floorboards. Mr. King David said, his voice pleasant but dangerous. You stated under oath that you are 100% certain that you saw your daughter Nia King at your home in Atlanta on July 4th. You testified that you saw her hand over the card and write down the PIN code. Is that correct? Otis sat up straighter, annoyed by the repetition. I already told you. Yes. I saw it with my own eyes. I know where my children are on holidays. David stopped walking. He stood in the center of the room, holding the file like a weapon. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce a new piece of evidence. Exhibit C. Otis frowned. The confidence in his eyes flickered just for a second, replaced by the first tremor of doubt. He watched David approach the bench, and for the first time I saw sweat bead on my father's forehead. The trap was set, and he was standing right in the middle of it. David stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in front of the witness box, holding the file against his chest. He looked at Otis with an expression that was almost too polite. It was the calm before the storm. Mr. King, let us revisit your statement one last time, David said, his voice level and clear. You have testified under oath that on July 4th of this year you were in your backyard in southwest Atlanta hosting a family barbecue. That is correct, Otis replied, leaning back in his chair. He crossed his arms, looking bored. I do not know why you keep asking. I told you I was there. David nodded slowly. I am asking Mr. King because accuracy is vital in a felony case. I want to give you a chance to correct the record if you are mistaken. Is there any possibility at all that you might have the date wrong? Could it have been Memorial Day? Or perhaps Labor Day? Otis scoffed. He looked at the jury, rolling his eyes as if to say, Can you believe this guy? No, I am not mistaken, Otis declared, his voice rising. It was Independence Day. I remember because I was wearing my flag apron. I was grilling spare ribs. The charcoal was hot, and Nia was standing right next to me. David took a step closer. Right next to you? Yes, Otis snapped. She was drinking a glass of white wine. She was laughing. She handed the card to Ebony right over the potato salad. I saw the numbers on the card. I heard her voice. I am 100% certain. A father does not forget a moment like that. Otis looked at me, then a smug satisfaction in his eyes. He had added the detail about the potato salad to make it sound more authentic. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was cementing the narrative by adding sensory details. He had no idea that he had just sworn to a physical impossibility. David looked down at his feet, hiding a small, grim smile. He looked up at the judge. Thank you, Mr. King. You have been very clear. He turned to the clerk. Please mark this testimony. The witness has confirmed his location and the presence of the plaintiff on July 4th without any doubt. Otis adjusted his tie, feeling victorious. He looked at Ebony and winked. He believed he had just saved his daughter. He believed his lie was perfect. David walked back to the table and picked up the yellow envelope. The trap was not just set. Otis had just walked into it, locked the door, and swallowed the key. David turned to the judge with a look of absolute finality. Your Honor, at this time the prosecution moves to publish Exhibit C to the jury. Permission granted, Judge Thomas said, leaning forward, her interest piqued. David nodded to the court technician. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly, and a large projector screen behind the witness stand flickered to life. A high-resolution image appeared, blown up to 10 times its original size. It was not a credit card statement. It was not a text message. It was a scan of a United States passport. Specifically, it was page 14 of my passport. David picked up a laser pointer, the red dot dancing across the screen until it landed on a dark ink stamp in the center of the page. Mr. King. David said, his voice booming through the silent room. Please look at the screen. Do you recognize this document? Otis squinted, his confidence faltering for the first time. It looks like a passport, he grunted. It is. Nia King is passport, David corrected him. And can you read the date on that entry stamp for the court? Otis stayed silent. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He saw it. Everyone saw it. Let me read it for you, David, continued, his voice icy. July 4th. Heathrow Airport, United Kingdom. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The jurors leaned forward, their eyes darting from the screen to the man in the witness box. David clicked a button on a remote, and a second document appeared next to the passport. This is an official travel record from the United States Customs and Border Protection. It confirms that Nia King boarded Delta Flight 32 from Atlanta to London on July 3rd at 6 p.m. and did not return to the United States until July 10th. David turned back to Otis, who was now gripping the railing of the witness stand so hard his knuckles were white. Mr. King, you just swore under oath to this jury that you stood next to your daughter in your backyard in Atlanta on July 4th. You swore you saw her hand over a credit card. You even described the potato salad. Yet according to the federal government, Nia King was 4,000 miles away, crossing the Atlantic Ocean at that exact moment. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the sound of a lie shattering into a million pieces. So, I will ask you one more time, Mr. King, David said, leaning in close. Unless your backyard extends all the way to London, England, how exactly did you see your daughter give permission for these charges? Or are you lying to this court to protect a thief? Otis looked at the jury. The sympathy was gone. In its place was cold, hard anger. They realized they had been played. They realized the tears, the Bible, and the stories were all part of a calculated performance. Otis looked at his wife, but Viola had buried her face in her hands. He looked at Ebony, who was staring at the table, knowing it was over. I might have got the dates mixed up, Otis stammered, sweat pouring down his face. Maybe it was the week before. David slammed the file shut. No more questions, Your Honor. The prosecution asks that the witness be reminded of the penalties for perjury. As David walked back to our table, I looked at my father. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. I was the one with the power, and I had just used it to break the chains. Judge Thomas did not speak immediately. She reached for the heavy file that David had placed on her bench, her movements slow and deliberate. The rustling of the paper was the only sound in the cavernous room. She picked up a pair of reading glasses from her desk and slid them onto the bridge of her nose. She studied the document for a long, agonizing minute, her eyes scanning every line of the customs report. Then she slowly lowered the paper and looked over the rim of her spectacles directly at my father. Her expression was not one of anger, but of terrifying disappointment. It was the look of a matriarch who had just caught a child playing with matches in a library. Mr. King, Judge Thomas said, her voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence. I want to make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You stated that you were standing next to the plaintiff, your daughter, in your backyard in Atlanta on the 4th of July. You swore to this court that you physically watched her hand a credit card to the defendant. Otis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip. Yes, Your Honor. That is what I recall. The judge held up the piece of paper, shaking it slightly for emphasis. Because I am holding a certified record from the United States Department of Homeland Security. It states quite clearly that Nia King departed the United States on July 1st on a direct flight to Tokyo, Japan. It further states that she did not re-enter the country until July 10th. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mr. King, Tokyo is 6,700 miles away from Atlanta. Unless your backyard has a portal that spans the Pacific Ocean, it is physically impossible for your daughter to have been at your barbecue. Otis opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, Mr. Sterling, but Sterling was staring down at his legal pad, refusing to make eye contact. He knew the ship was sinking, and he had no intention of going down with it. The judge continued, her voice sharpening. So I am going to ask you again, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer, because perjury is a felony offense in my courtroom. How do you explain the fact that you saw a woman who was standing in the middle of Shibuya Crossing eating ribs in your backyard? Are you confused, Mr. King? Or are you lying? Otis crumbled. The arrogance that had sustained him for decades evaporated in seconds. He slumped in the chair, looking suddenly old and frail. I might have been mistaken about the date, Your Honor. My memory is not what it used to be. Maybe it was June. Judge Thomas slammed her hand on the bench. Do not insult my intelligence, sir. You gave us details. You described the weather. You described the food. You described the specific act of writing down a PIN code. You concocted a story to frame your own daughter and defraud this court. I watched from the plaintiff's table, feeling a cold, hard satisfaction. My father had always been the king of his own little world, ruling by fear and volume. But he was not in his living room anymore. He was in a place where facts mattered more than feelings. He looked at me, then his eyes pleading for me to intervene to save him from the wrath of the law. But I just stared back, my face a mask of indifference. He had made his choice when he took the stand. Now he had to live with the verdict. The sweat on my father's face was no longer just a sheen. It was dripping off his chin, staining the collar of his Sunday suit darker with every passing second. He looked like a man whose parachute had failed to open. He gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles white, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. I suppose I must have remembered wrong. Otis stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I am getting older. Your Honor, my mind plays tricks on me sometimes. It must have been Memorial Day. Yes, that is it. It was May, not July. I just got the holidays mixed up. It was an honest mistake. The sound of the gavel striking the wooden block was like a gunshot. It made everyone in the room jump, including the bailiff. Judge Thomas rose from her chair, her black robe billowing around her like the wings of an avenging angel. She was not buying the act. She was insulted by it. A mistake, Mr. King. She thundered, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You swore on a Bible. You gave us sensory details. You described the heat of the grill. You described the specific apron you were wearing. You described the potato salad. You anchored your lie to a specific federal holiday to manipulate this jury. That is not a lapse in memory. That is a calculated, malicious fabrication. Otis shrank back into his chair, looking physically smaller than I had ever seen him. But I just wanted to... Be quiet, the judge snapped, cutting him off. You wanted to protect a thief by becoming a liar. You thought you could come into my courtroom and insult the intelligence of this court because you are used to being the loudest voice in the room. Well, let me be clear. In this room, facts speak louder than fathers. She turned her gaze to the bailiff. Officer, take Mr. King into custody. I am holding him in direct contempt of court. Furthermore, I am referring this entire testimony to the district attorney's office, with a recommendation for immediate charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. A gasp went up from the gallery. Viola let out a high-pitched shriek, clutching her chest. Otis looked at the bailiff approaching him with handcuffs, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at his lawyer, Mr. Sterling, begging for help. But Sterling was busy studying his fingernails, clearly deciding that his retainer did not cover saving a man who had just perjured himself in front of a superior court judge. Otis stood up on shaking legs. As the officer pulled his arms behind his back and secured the cuffs, the metal clicking sound cut through the silence. My father looked at me. For the first time in my life, I did not see the tyrant who controlled our family. I saw a pathetic, frightened man who had gambled his freedom on a lie and lost. He opened his mouth to say something to me, perhaps to plead, perhaps to curse, but the officer nudged him forward. "Let us go, Mr. King." I watched them march him out the side door, usually reserved for convicts. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably in the front row, rocking back and forth. Ebony was staring at the empty witness chair, her face gray, realizing her shield was gone. The courtroom was in chaos, but I sat perfectly still. I did not feel joy. I felt relief. The spell was broken. The man who had convinced everyone he was untouchable had just been touched by the long arm of the law. And I was the one who had guided it there. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind my father, sealing his fate, but the echo remained in the stunned silence of the courtroom. In the vacuum left by his departure, a different sound pierced the air. It was the sharp scrape of shoe leather against the floor. Brad stood up in the back row. He rose slowly, like a man carrying a physical burden that had suddenly become too heavy to bear. He was not looking at the judge. He was not looking at the jury. His eyes were locked on the back of Ebony's head. Ebony turned around, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She reached a hand out toward him, her fingers trembling. "Brad," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Baby, please, sit down. Do not make a scene. We can fix this." Brad stared at her hand as if it were a venomous snake. He took a step back, recoiling from her touch. The confusion that had clouded his face for the last hour was gone. In its place was a look of absolute, shattering clarity. He looked from Ebony to my weeping mother, then to the empty seat where Otis had just been sitting. He looked at me, sitting calm and vindicated at the plaintiff's table. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into a grotesque picture. It was all a lie. Brad said, his voice low but carrying clearly to every corner of the room, every single bit of it. "Mr. Miller," the bailiff warned, stepping forward. "Please sit down or leave the courtroom." Brad ignored him. He looked directly at Ebony, his eyes wet with tears of rage. "The truck, the honeymoon, the designer clothes. You told me your dad paid for it. You told me it was family money." He laughed, a short, harsh sound that lacked any humor. "But there is no money, is there? It was all smoke and mirrors. You stole from your sister to buy me a life I could not afford just so you could play pretend." Ebony stood up, ignoring her lawyer, his hand on her arm. "Brad, stop it. I did it for us. I wanted us to be happy." "You did not do it for us," Brad shouted, his voice breaking. "You did it for you. You did it because you are a fraud." He looked at Viola, who was clutching her chest. "And you helped her. You all sat there at that barbecue eating those ribs, smiling at me, knowing it was all stolen. You let me drive a stolen truck. You let me sleep in a stolen hotel room. You made me an accomplice to your crime." He reached up and pulled the gold wedding band off his finger. It clattered onto the wooden bench in front of him, spinning noisily before coming to a rest. "I am done," he said, his voice trembling. "I am not going to be part of this circus anymore. I am not going to raise a child in a nest of vipers." Ebony let out a scream that was raw and terrified. "Brad. No. Do not leave me. You cannot leave me." Brad looked at me one last time. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the warning I had given him weeks ago, the warning he had been too blind to see. "I am sorry, Nia," he mouthed. Then he turned and walked out. He did not run. He walked with the determined stride of a man escaping a burning building. Ebony tried to run after him, but the bailiff stepped in her path, blocking her way. She collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, wailing into the void. The illusion was not just cracked, it was pulverized. She had lost the money. She had lost her father. And now she had lost the audience she had performed so desperate to impress. The courtroom was still reeling from Brad's departure when the sound of Ebony's grief curdled into something far more ugly. The sorrow evaporated instantly. In its place was a white-hot, narcissistic rage. She did not look at me. She did not look at the judge. She spun around to face her mother Viola, who was sitting in the front row, trembling in the wreckage of their family reputation. The mask of the sweet, victimized younger sister fell away completely, revealing the feral creature underneath. Ebony lunged towards the wooden railing, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She pointed a manicured finger at the empty witness chair where Otis had sat moments before, then turned her fury onto the only target left. "He promised me," Ebony shrieked, her voice cracking the heavy silence of the room. "Dad said he could handle it. He told me to just stick to the script and everything would be fine. He said Nia would back down if we pushed hard enough." Viola flinched as if she had been slapped physically. "Ebony, honey, please calm down. Do not tell me to calm down," Ebony screamed, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant child. "Look at this mess. Brad is gone. He actually left me. My life is over. This is all Dad's fault. He is the one who told me to say it was a verbal contract. He is the one who said he would fix the dates so the timeline worked. He said he was the head of the house and the court would listen to him." The entire courtroom watched in horrified fascination. The defense attorney, Mr. Sterling, stood up and tried to grab Ebony's arm to silence her. "Ms. King, you need to be quiet right now. You are admitting to conspiracy on the record." Ebony slapped his hand away with a violence that shocked everyone. She was beyond legal strategy now. She was in survival mode, and like a trapped animal, she was biting the hand that fed her. "I do not care what is on the record. I paid you to fix this. Dad sold his truck to pay you and you did nothing. You let Nia win." She turned back to Viola, her eyes bulging with accusation. "You were supposed to protect me. You said we were a team, but you just sat there and let Dad get arrested. Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you come up with a better lie? Now I'm going to jail and I'm going to be single and poor and it is all your fault." It was a breathtaking display of entitlement. Even in her darkest moment, Ebony took zero responsibility. To her, the crime was not the theft of $80,000. The crime was that her parents had failed to execute the cover-up successfully. She was cannibalizing them. She was stripping away the last shreds of their dignity to build a pedestal for her own victimhood. Viola began to wail, a low, broken sound of absolute defeat. "We tried, baby. We gave you everything we had. We gave you everything. It was not enough." Ebony spat back, her voice dripping with disdain. "It was never enough. You are useless, both of you." I watched from my table, feeling a chill run down my spine. This was the monster I had grown up with, finally unmasked for the world to see. She did not love them. She viewed them as staff members who had failed to perform a service. My parents had bankrupted themselves, committed perjury, and destroyed their relationship with me, all to serve a master who despised them for their failure. Judge Thomas banged her gavel, but her face showed weary disgust. "Bailiff, take the defendant into custody. I have heard enough." As the officer approached Ebony with the handcuffs, she did not fight him. She just kept screaming at her mother, hurling insults, until the heavy door clicked shut, leaving Viola alone in the front row, weeping into her hands, finally realizing she had sacrificed her good child to worship a demon. The chaos in the courtroom eventually subsided, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The bailiffs restored order, but the energy had shifted permanently. My father, Otis, was not returning to the gallery. I watched as the officers finished processing his transfer paperwork, right there at the side of the room. He was no longer Otis King, the proud homeowner and patriarch. He was now an inmate in the Fulton County system, facing immediate booking for felony perjury and obstruction of justice. He looked at me one last time before they led him through the heavy steel door. His eyes were empty. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma, realizing the world he knew was gone. The jury did not need days to deliberate. They did not even need hours. They were back in the box in 45 minutes. That is how long it took them to decide that my sister was a criminal. When they filed back in, they did not look at the defense table. That is always the tell. If the jury looks at the defendant, there is a chance for mercy. If they look at the floor, it is a conviction. Ebony stood up as the foreman rose to read the verdict. She was trembling, stripped of her arrogance, stripped of her husband, and stripped of her father's protection. She looked small and fragile, in her navy cardigan, a little girl playing dress-up in a courtroom. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, adjusted his glasses and unfolded the paper. In the matter of the state versus Ebony King on the charge of identity theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Ebony let out a small, strangled whimper. Viola, sitting alone in the front row, put her head down on the wooden bench in front of her. On the charge of credit card fraud involving an amount exceeding $50,000, we find the defendant guilty. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so powerful my knees almost buckled. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being lifted off my shoulders after a 10-mile hike. The truth was finally on the record. On the charge of first-degree forgery, we find the defendant guilty. 3 counts, 3 convictions. The trifecta of her deception was complete. Judge Thomas nodded, accepting the verdict. She turned her gaze to Ebony. Ms. King, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Given the overwhelming evidence, your lack of remorse, and your outburst in this courtroom, I am revoking your bail immediately. You will be remanded to custody to await sentencing. Ebony looked up, panic flooding her eyes. Wait. No. You cannot take me to jail. I have to go home. I have to call Brad. The bailiff moved in swiftly. There was no gentleness this time. He pulled her arms behind her back and secured the cuffs. The sound was distinct. Click, click. It was the sound of consequences arriving late, but arriving all the same. I stood up and gathered my files. I did not look at Ebony as they marched her out. I did not look at my mother, who was sobbing into the empty space where her family used to be. I walked out of the courtroom, past the reporters, past the whispers. I walked out into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The air was hot and humid, but for the first time in my life I could breathe. I had lost my parents, I had lost my sister, but I had got myself back, and that was the only verdict that mattered. The marble hallway outside the courtroom was long and echoing, a tunnel of white stone that amplified every sound. I was halfway to the elevators, the sound of my heels clicking a steady rhythm of freedom, when I heard the frantic scrambling behind me. It was the sound of desperation. I did not need to turn around to know who it was, but I stopped anyway. I owed myself this final look. Nia, wait. Viola. King came stumbling toward me. She looked like a woman who had survived a natural disaster. Her church hat was crooked, sliding dangerously off her pins. Her makeup, usually applied with surgical precision, was smeared across her cheeks in dark tear-stained streaks. She did not look like the composed matriarch who had sat in the front row judging me. She looked like a ghost. She grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Her nails dug into the fabric of my suit. "You have to fix this," she gasped, her breath coming in short, panicked, ragged bursts. "You have to go back in there. You have to tell the judge it was a mistake. Tell her you want to drop the charges." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then up at her face. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off me. "Mom, the trial is over. The jury has spoken. There is no dropping the charges. Ebony is a convicted felon. Dad is in a holding cell for perjury. It is done." "No, it is not done," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "You can appeal to the judge. You can tell them you forgive her. Your father is an old man, Nia. He cannot survive in jail. And Ebony, she is fragile. She is terrified. You cannot let them take your family away." I stared at her, marveling at the depth of her delusion. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own making, she still believed that I existed solely to clean up their messes. She still believed that my feelings, my finances, and my dignity were currency she could spend to save her golden child. "I am not the one who took them away, Mom," I said, my voice low and steady. "They took themselves away. Ebony chose to steal. Dad chose to lie. You chose to enable them. I just turned on the lights." Viola's face crumpled. She switched tactics, instantly moving from command to guilt. How can you be so cold? We are your flesh and blood. Family is everything, Nia. We stick together. We protect each other. How can you sleep at night knowing you destroyed us? That was the line I had been waiting for. The line she had used to manipulate me since I was a child. The line that meant, shut up and take the abuse. I took a step closer to her, towering over her in my heels. Family does not steal my identity, Mom. Family does not forge my signature. Family does not sit on a witness stand and lie to a judge to send me to prison. You do not mourn the relationship we had. You mourn the bank account you lost. You are not crying because you lost a daughter. You are crying because you lost your scapegoat. I pressed the button for the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft chime offering me an escape route. I stepped inside and turned around to face her one last time. Go hire a lawyer for Dad, Mom. And this time try to find one you can actually pay for. The doors closed, cutting off the image of my mother standing alone in the hallway, a small broken figure screaming at a metal door. As the elevator descended, taking me down to the street, and away from the madness, I checked my watch. It was barely noon. I had the whole rest of my life ahead of me, and for the first time in 30 years, it belonged entirely to me. I stepped out of the courthouse doors and took a deep breath of the thick, humid Atlanta air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. Behind me, the heavy brass doors swung shut, muffling the chaos of the courtroom, but not before Viola managed to slip through them. She was relentless. She followed me to the top of the concrete steps, her shadow stretching out over mine, trying to eclipse me one last time. She was panting, her chest heaving beneath her Sunday dress. She looked around wildly, checking to see if anyone was watching, desperate to maintain the facade, even as the foundation crumbled. She opened her mouth to launch into another sermon, another guilt trip about blood and duty, but I did not give her the chance. I reached into my purse and pulled out my oversized black sunglasses. I took my time wiping a speck of dust from the lens, letting her stand there in the silence, waiting for my attention. I slid the frames onto my face, effectively putting a black wall between her pleading eyes and my soul. The world instantly became darker, cooler, and sharper. You are right about one thing, Mom, I said, my voice calm and devoid of any emotion. It was a tone I used for business negotiations, not family chats. You always said that family comes first. That was your golden rule. Viola's face softened just a fraction, a flicker of hope lighting up her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought the programming had kicked back in. Yes, Nia. Exactly. We are family. We have to. I held up a hand to stop her. And today I finally listened to you. I continued. I have decided to choose my family. I have decided to prioritize the only person who has ever actually looked out for me. I have chosen myself. I am my family now. Me. My peace. My future. And my bank account. Viola recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was not talking to her daughter anymore. She was talking to a stranger who knew all her secrets. I took a step down the stairs, putting physical distance between us. Goodbye, Viola, I said. Using her first name to strip away the unearned authority of the title mother, I wish you the best of luck coming up with the bail money for your husband. And you should probably start saving for Ebony's commissary account. I hear the vending machines in prison are quite expensive. I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked down the wide concrete steps with a stride that felt lighter than air. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, burning with a mixture of rage and disbelief, but I did not flinch. I did not slow down. I walked straight to my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the leather seat. As I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw a survivor. I started the engine, turned up the radio, and pulled out of the parking lot. I left them there on the pavement, the liar, the thief, and the enabler. They had each other now, just like they always wanted. And I had the whole world. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted. The legal system did not pause to let my family catch their breath. Brad was the first to strike, and his response was scorched earth. He did not just file for divorce. He hired a forensic attorney to untangle his finances from Ebony's toxic web. He sued her for fraud, emotional distress, and defamation. The man who once looked at her with adoration now looked at her across a deposition table with cold indifference. He testified that their entire marriage was built on a foundation of larceny. He won the house, the remaining assets, and most importantly, his freedom. He walked away with his credit score battered, but his dignity intact, leaving Ebony with nothing but a pile of legal notices she could not afford to read. Ebony's downfall was a public spectator sport. To pay her restitution and legal fees, the court ordered the liquidation of her assets. It was a fire sale of vanity. The Chanel bags she had flaunted on Instagram were sold off in bulk lots. The red-bottom shoes, the jewelry, the designer baby clothes, everything went under the hammer. Strangers bought her prized possessions for pennies on the dollar. The identity she had stolen from me was stripped away layer by layer until she was just a woman in a jumpsuit standing before a judge. The sentencing hearing was short. There were no tears left to manipulate the court. The judge sentenced Ebony King to 2 years in a state penitentiary, followed by 5 years of strict probation. As the bailiff led her away to begin her term, she did not look like a socialite. She looked like exactly what she was, a convict. She traded her silk sheets for a steel cot and her brunch dates for roll call. Otis escaped prison, but he did not escape punishment. Because of his age and lack of prior criminal history, he accepted a plea deal for a suspended sentence and probation. But the cost was catastrophic. He had drained his retirement savings, sold his beloved truck, and mortgaged his home to pay for a defense lawyer who lost the case in spectacular fashion. He was financially ruined. The man who prided himself on being the provider was reduced to living on meager Social Security checks that barely covered the electricity bill. Worse than the poverty was the silence. The reputation he had spent 40 years building at the Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church evaporated overnight. The news of his perjury, the public record of him lying to frame his own daughter, spread through the congregation like wildfire. He was no longer Deacon King, the pillar of the community. He was a pariah. When he walked into the sanctuary, conversation stopped. People looked away. The friends he thought he had abandoned him, unwilling to associate with a man who would sacrifice his own flesh and blood for pride. He spent his days sitting on his porch in a rocking chair, staring at the empty driveway where his truck used to be, trapped in a prison of his own making with no one to blame but himself. The sunset over the Atlanta skyline was painting the glass walls of my penthouse in shades of gold and violet. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights flicker to life below. The silence in the room was not empty. It was expensive. It was the heavy, luxurious silence of a life that had finally been swept clean of chaos. 6 months ago, standing in this exact spot would have been impossible. My phone would have been ringing off the hook. My stomach would have been in knots, waiting for the next attack, the next guilt trip, or the next demand for money. I would have been drowning in a sea of other people's problems. But tonight, the air was still. There were no angry voicemails from my mother. There were no manipulative texts from my sister. There were no frantic calls from debt collectors looking for a woman who did not exist. My phone vibrated against the cool marble of the kitchen island. I did not flinch. I did not feel that old familiar spike of cortisol shooting through my veins. I walked over and tapped the screen with a steady hand. It was a notification from my bank app. I opened it and stared at the numbers glowing in green against the white background. FICO score, 810. Below that was a second notification from the commercial lending department. Your application for the downtown office space has been fully approved. Congratulations on the launch of King Financial Consulting. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 30 years. 810. To most people it was just a number. But to me, it was a scoreboard. It was the quantifiable proof of my victory. It represented every battle fought, every lie uncovered, and every toxic tie severed. I had clawed my way back from the brink of ruin. I had rebuilt my reputation brick by brick, not with the approval of my parents, but with the undeniable power of my own competence. I walked over to the bar cart and picked up a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. The cork popped with a satisfying sound. I poured the dark red liquid into a crystal glass, watching it swirl. I had lost a lot to get here. I had lost the family barbecues. I had lost the illusion of parental love. I had lost the sister I thought I knew. I was an orphan in the eyes of the court and the church. But as I looked around my quiet, beautiful home, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had my dignity, I had my sanity, and most importantly, I had my name back. It belonged to me now. No one else could sign it. No one else could spend it. I walked back to the window and held the glass up to the city lights, making a toast to the reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me was strong. She was scarred, but she was free. "Freedom is not free," I whispered to the empty room, taking a slow sip of the wine. "But it is worth every single penny." I turned away from the window and walked toward my office. The view was nice, but I had work to do. My new life was just beginning. Naya King's story serves as a powerful reminder that financial abuse often hides behind the mask of family loyalty. We learned that toxic enmeshment thrives on guilt, but facts and documentation are the ultimate antidote to gaslighting. Nia showed us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. You cannot sacrifice your own financial future and integrity just to enable someone else's delusions, even if they share your blood. Real love respects boundaries. It does not destroy them. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose justice over tradition and walk away to build your own peace. If you have ever had to set a hard boundary to protect your peace or your wallet, tell us your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and follow for more satisfying stories of justice.